Um, Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are unpacking a story that is honestly equal parts sporting history, theatrical drama, and absolute tragedy.
Yeah, it really is.
We are looking at the life of a man known to the world as Gentleman Chris Adams.
Right. And it is a name that might ring a bell if you were a wrestling fan in the 80s, specifically in the scorching heat of the Texas territories. But his influence is actually something you see on television every single week today, even if you don't realize it.
Exactly. And the thing that really grabbed me when we started pulling these sources together is that nickname. Gentleman Chris Adams.
Yeah.
You hear that, and you picture this polite, refined Englishman, sipping tea, maybe opening doors for old ladies.
And on camera, that was exactly the persona.
Right.
The tea drinker, the technical wizard, the polished athlete. He was the guy you'd want your daughter to date. At least that's what the promoters wanted you to think.
But the reality...
Yeah, the reality is a whole different story.
The reality we found in the research is a stark and honestly almost violent contrast. We're talking about a life riddled with heavy drug addiction, severe legal issues, domestic violence, and ultimately a death that sounds like something out of a cheap noir crime novel.
It's the ultimate irony.
It really is.
Yeah.
The gentleman who died in a drunken brawl.
It is a study in wasted potential. We often talk about tragic figures in entertainment, but Adams is a really unique case. Historian Dave Melter, who is essentially the encyclopedia of wrestling history, cited Adams as one of the 20 best performers in the United States at his peak.
Not just good, but elite.
Exactly.
Okay, let's pause there because that's a massive claim.
Okay.
Top 20 in the U.S. during the 80s.
It's a crowded field.
It is a massively crowded field.
Yeah.
You've got Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat. To be in that conversation is huge. Was he really that good, or is that just history looking back with rose-colored glasses?
Now, the praise is legitimate, but it's for a very specific reason. He wasn't the biggest draw like Hogan.
Right.
But in terms of work rate...
Meaning the actual in-ring stuff.
Right, the ability to put on a believable, athletic, compelling match. He was light years ahead of most guys. He brought a realism that just didn't exist in American wrestling at the time.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to explore how a British Judo champion revolutionized American wrestling moves, specifically the Superkick, which everyone uses now.
Everyone.
We are going to unpack his legendary run in world-class championship wrestling, the dynamic duo, the feuds. And we are going to look unflinchingly at that dark spiral that led to his shocking death.
It's a heavy one, but it's an important piece of history to really understand how the business evolved.
So let's start at the beginning. Before the lights and the Texas crowds, Chris Adams was born in 1955 in Rugby, Warwickshire, England. And right off the bat, the sources highlight that this wasn't a guy who grew up dreaming of being a show wrestler.
Not at all.
He was a legitimate athlete.
A very high-level athlete. He started judo at age 9 and trained exclusively in that discipline for 14 years. This wasn't a hobby where he went to the YMCA on Tuesdays. This was his entire life. He and his brother Neil Adams were national and international caliber.
Now, Neil Adams went on to win a silver medal at the 1980 and 1984 Olympics.
That's right. Neil is actually one of the most decorated British judokas in history. And Chris was right there with him in terms of skill level early on. Chris was actually a member of the British judo team for the 1976 Summer Olympics.
That's incredible.
He didn't end up competing in the games, but just making the squad tells you everything you need to know about his discipline and physical capability at that age.
He wasn't just a grappler, though. The sources mentioned he competed in football, rugby, cricket, and amateur wrestling. And this is the part that surprised me. He spent 4 years studying architecture.
Which really adds a layer to the gentleman persona later on, don't you think?
Absolutely.
He wasn't just playing a character who was educated and refined. He actually had that background. He had a life outside of athletics before he ever stepped into a ring. He could draw blueprints. He understood structure.
So how does an architect and a judo black belt end up in pro wrestling?
It's a weird pivot.
In 1978, he enters the business. But the source makes a specific point that he had absolutely no official pro wrestling training.
Which is wild to think about. Usually you go to a camp, you learn to bump.
Bumping is the art of falling right.
Exactly, taking a fall without hurting yourself. You learn the ropes, you learn the psychology. Adams just walked in relying entirely on his judo skills. He debuted in June 1978.
Okay, hold on. We need to pause on the judo background because I feel like judo champion is a throwaway line in a lot of wrestler bios, but the sources here are emphatic that Chris Adams wasn't a guy who took a few classes.
Far from it. This is where we have to look at the difference between fighting and grappling. Judo is the art of using an opponent's momentum against them. It's about balance, leverage, and the throw. When Adams walked into pro wrestling in 1978, he didn't know how to work a match.
Meaning he didn't know the cooperative dance of it,
Ex-
which sounds incredibly dangerous. If I'm a wrestler and I'm trusting you with my body and your instinct is to legitimately slam me into the mat using torque, I can't control it. That's a recipe for disaster.
Usually, yes. But here is the key insight from the research. Judo also teaches you how to fall. They call it yukimi.
Yukimi.
Yeah, brick falls. Adams knew how to hit the mat hard without killing himself. So while he didn't know the showmanship yet, he was physically incapable of looking clumsy. He had what insiders call snugness.
Snugness. That sounds cozy, but I assume in a wrestling ring it means something else.
It means his holds felt tight. They looked real because biomechanically he was applying real pressure, just stopping a millimeter before the bone broke.
That must have terrified the veterans.
Oh, it terrified the old school British wrestlers like Big Daddy.
Yeah.
They looked at this kid and thought, is he going to shoot on me? Is he going to try to hurt me for real?
And that tension, that whole, is this real or is this fake vibe that became his entire career signature?
Exactly. He was working for joint promotions in the UK, appearing on ITV's World of Sport. If you know British wrestling from that era, it was very technical.
Rounds-based 3.
Yes, rounds-based serious stuff, almost like boxing matches, but with grappling. He was in there with absolute legends like the Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith.
And he held his own. He won the British Light Heavyweight Championship and the British Commonwealth Tag Team Championship. So he clearly picked it up fast.
He did. But the UK scene was very specific. To really break out to become a global star, he had to go to America. And that transition happened in 1981.
He moved to Los Angeles, and this is where the transformation really begins. He went to work for the LaBelles, Mike and Jean LaBelle. Now, Jean LaBelle is a name that comes up in everything from Muhammad Ali stories to Bruce Lee stories.
Right, and for those who don't know, the LaBelles are royalty in the combat sports world. Jean LaBelle was a judo champion himself, a stuntman, a wrestler. He was known as Judo Jean LaBelle.
So it was the perfect landing spot for Adams.
It was because they understood his background. They spoke the same language of leverage and joint locks.
The source mentions an interesting detail about his gear here. When he first arrived in L.A., he was wrestling barefoot.
Traditional judo style. He was presenting himself as a martial artist, first wrestler, second. But after that first tour, he switched. He put on the boots, the knee pads, the arm pads.
That was the moment he physically transitioned from judo guy to pro wrestler who uses judo.
Right.
And that leads us to the innovation. We promised you we'd talk about the moves. Chris Adams was doing things in the early 80s that nobody else was doing.
He brought a fluidity to the ring that was ahead of its time. The sources list a few specific innovations. For one, somersaulting out of arm bars.
Which you see in almost every cruiserweight match today.
Exactly. But in 1981, guys were usually just powering out of holds or reaching for the ropes. It was static.
Just pulling their arm away.
Yeah, just pulling. Adams would use his agility to flip out of it. He was doing backflips, diving through the ropes to the outside. He used the enzui-giri, which is a kick to the back of the head.
But the big one, the one that changed the game, is the kick.
The judo kick.
Later known to the world as the Superkick.
Yes.
Let's get into the legacy of this. If you watch wrestling today, the Young Bucks, the Usos, Shawn Michaels, it is the most overused move in the business. It's everywhere. But you're telling me this starts with Adams.
It starts with Adams, but more importantly, it starts with the mechanics Adams brought. Before Chris Adams, a kick in American wrestling was usually a punt to the gut. It looked like a bar fight.
It was messy, ugly, brawling, just throwing a limb out there.
Right. Adams brought the martial arts snap. He introduced the concept of the chambered leg. You lift the knee first, you load the hip, then you snap the foot out to the chin and retract it instantly.
Why does the retraction matter? Why not just follow through like a soccer kick?
Because of the sound and the visual. It's the whip effect. If you leave your leg out there, it looks like a push. If you snap it back, it looks like an impact. Adams also perfected the thigh slap.
Yes, the thigh slap.
Slapping his own leg at the exact moment of impact to create that gunshot sound.
Which is a controversial thing today, right?
Yeah.
Fans complain about it being too obvious because everyone does it.
Today, yes, because everyone slaps their leg for everything.
Yeah.
But in 1983, it was magic. The audience in the Sportatorium heard a crack that sounded like a baseball bat hitting a melon.
Wow.
They didn't know it was a thigh slap. They thought Adams just took a man's head off.
So he brought realism through illusion.
He brought danger. In a world of body slams and bear hugs, a sudden kick to the chin that could knock you out cold. It changed the pacing of matches.
It meant the match could end at any second out of nowhere.
That is the DNA of modern wrestling, and it belongs to Chris Adams.
So he's in L.A., he's inventing moves,
Yeah.
he's winning the NWA America's title. But the real explosion of his career happens when he gets a call from Texas.
Fritz von Erich, 1983.
This is the golden era. World-class championship wrestling, WCCW.
And we need to set the scene here. So he leaves the technical rounds-based wrestling of the UK and lands in Texas. And not just any Texas. We are talking about the Dallas Sportatorium.
The sport of...
If you've never looked up footage of this building, you really need to. It was essentially a tin barn. No air conditioning.
Oh, man.
In the Texas, summer temperatures inside would hit 110, 115 degrees. It smelled like stale beer, cigarette smoke, and sweat.
And yet every Friday night, it was the hottest ticket in the state.
It was absolute hysteria, and I don't use that word lightly. The Von Erich brothers, Kevin, Kerry, David, they weren't just wrestlers to these people.
They were local gods.
They were like the Kennedys of Texas. They were good Christian boys fighting the forces of evil.
So enter Chris Adams. He's British, he's refined, he's sipping tea. In any other territory, that guy is a villain immediately. He's a snob. Why did Dallas embrace him?
That's the genius of Fritz von Erich's booking. They didn't present him as a snob, they presented him as a gentleman.
There's a difference.
A huge difference. He opened doors, he was polite, and most importantly, the source material mentions this crucial detail. The Von Erichs vouched for him.
The pen pal angle.
Right. They told the fans, this is our friend from across the pond. In the psychology of wrestling, that is a rub. By standing next to Kevin Von Erich and shaking his hand, Adams absorbed all that love by osmosis.
He became the honorary Von Erich.
Yes.
And the fans just ate it up. He wasn't just some foreign guy. He was family. He was teaming with Kerry and Kevin against the fabulous Freebirds. He won his first 11 matches straight.
Incredible run.
He won the American Heavyweight Championship on Thanksgiving at the Reunion Arena. He was at the top of the card. But you know, in wrestling, you can't stay friends forever. Peace is boring, conflict pays the bills.
It always does.
And this brings us to one of the most famous turns in wrestling history, the chair shot.
This is 1984. Adams hires Gary Hart as his manager. Now, Gary Hart was a legendary villain manager. Just standing next to him made you look suspicious.
The story was that Adams was going to fire Hart to get back in the Von Erichs' good graces. They had a match. Kevin pinned Adams. And everyone thought, okay, Adams will shake his hand, fire the bad manager, and we're good.
But that's not what happened.
No, it wasn't.
Adams snapped. He grabbed a wooden chair and slammed it over Kevin Von Erich's head.
And we have to get into the details of this chair shot because it's gruesome. The source says Adams claimed the chair accidentally split.
Okay, so usually in wrestling, you use a metal chair. And you hit the back or use a specific technique to minimize impact. Or if you use wood, it's usually gimmicked.
Shaved down so it breaks.
Right. This was a real solid wooden chair.
A literal piece of furniture.
Exactly. He hit him so hard, or the angle was just wrong, that it split and it caused a genuine concussion and opened Kevin up. There was blood everywhere.
And in wrestling, there's a concept called a receipt. If you hurt me legitimately, I'm going to hurt you back later to make us even.
And Kevin got his receipt. A month later at Reunion Arena, they did the spot again. Kevin hit Adams with the chair. This time the chair shattered again, and a piece of wood actually got stuck in Adams' nose.
Right near his eye.
Right near his eye.
Ouch. That's not working. That's assault at that point.
It was visceral. It was violent. And it cemented the turn. The fans went from loving this polite Englishman to chanting Benedict Adams.
Benedict Adams, that's great.
They held up posters calling him a traitor. Psychologically, it was a masterclass. He broke the heart of every fan who wanted him to be the fourth Von Erich brother.
This launched the next phase of his career. He wasn't the lonely traitor for long. He found a partner, Gino Hernandez.
The dynamic duo.
Or as they were sometimes called, the handsome half-breeds, referencing Adams's British and Gino's Hispanic heritage. They were the cool villains.
Contrast Gino for me. If Adams is the refined technical judo guy, who is Gino Hernandez?
Well, Gino was a handsome one. He was flashy, arrogant, dripping with jewelry. He was a party boy. If Adams was the architect, Gino was the rock star.
Together, they had this chemistry that was just electric. They represented everything the working-class Texas crowd hated: arrogance, wealth, and foreign backgrounds.
They really leaned into the arrogance. They had this gimmick where they would cut their opponent's hair.
Long before Brutus Beefcake made it his whole thing in the WWF, Adams and Hernandez were doing it in Texas. It's the ultimate disrespect.
I beat you, and now I'm going to humiliate you by taking your masculinity.
Exactly. In Texas. cutting a man's hair against his will. That's fighting words.
This led to a massive showdown. October 1985, the Cotton Bowl, hair versus hair match against Kevin and Kerry Von Erich.
The stakes couldn't be higher, and the result was iconic. Adams and Hernandez lost.
They were shaved bald in the middle of the stadium in front of tens of thousands of people.
I've seen pictures of this. They had to wrestle in masks for a while afterwards while their hair grew back.
Which is such a great wrestling detail. It keeps the shame alive for months. Every time they came out in those masks, the crowd remembered, yes, you got shaved.
But as with all bad guy teams, the ego eventually gets in the way. Christmas 1985. The breakup.
It was a classic setup. They were wrestling the Cosmic Cowboys, who were just the Von Erichs in masks, which everyone knew but pretended not to.
Right. Gino Hernandez claims he has a knee injury. He refuses to tag in. He leaves Adams in there to get destroyed.
Adams takes a beating, finally tosses Kevin over the rope to end the match, and then snap. He slaps Hernandez. He walks out.
And just like that, the crowd is ready to cheer him again. He turned face. This set up the feud between the two former partners.
And this leads to the blinding incident, January 1986.
The stipulation was that the loser would have Freebird hair cream rubbed into their scalp, a callback to the hair gimmick. But during the match, Hernandez grabs the cream, which the source notes was actually a dark liquid substance.
And he throws it right into Adams' eyes.
This was a huge angle. It wasn't just my eyes sting. They sold it as Adams being permanently blinded.
It was a way to write him off television.
We call this kayfabe, the reality within the show. In reality, Adams wanted to go visit family in England, tour Japan, maybe go to Israel. So they did the blinding angle to explain why he disappeared. He was recovering.
But the feud never got a proper finish.
No. And this is the first really dark turn in the story. In February 1986, while this feud was hot, Gino Hernandez was found dead.
A drug overdose believed to be cocaine.
Right. So the feud ended abruptly. Adams came back, but his greatest rival, his greatest partner, was gone. And you have to wonder what that did to him psychologically.
And around this time, 1986, the darkness starts to creep into Adams' own life, too. We start seeing the legal issues pile up. And there's one story in the source that is just, it's hard to believe it actually happened. The Mile High incident.
June 30, 1986. Adams is flying back from a wrestling event in Puerto Rico.
He's on a commercial flight.
He is intoxicated. And apparently he gets belligerent when they stop serving liquor. An FAA inspector is on board and stops the sales. Adams doesn't take it well.
Doesn't take it well is putting it mildly. The source says he grabbed the pilot, John Bentley, by the collar.
And headbutted him 3 times.
He headbutted the pilot of the plane and punched a flight attendant.
It took fellow wrestler Kevin Von Erich and others to physically restrain him.
Imagine being on that flight. You look up and the pilot is getting headbutted by a pro wrestler. It sounds like a movie scene, but this is a federal crime.
The consequences were real this time. He was sentenced to 90 days in jail and fined $500.
A slap on the wrist by today's standards, maybe, but still.
It was a sign that the alcohol use was becoming a violent problem. He wasn't just a party guy like Gino. He was becoming dangerous.
And sadly, that violence didn't stay on airplanes or in the ring. We have to talk about the domestic violence.
We do. This is the ugly side of the gentleman persona. In February 1988, Adams was arrested in Lufkin, Texas. His wife at the time, Tony Adams, was found severely beaten.
The source says he allegedly did this in a drunken rage.
He was sentenced to a year's probation, but it established a pattern. The drinking, the rage, the violence. Later in 1991, he had multiple DUI arrests. The spiral was accelerating.
And it's hard to reconcile, right? The man who opens doors, the man with the architecture degree becoming this monster when the bottle is open.
It is difficult to reconcile the technical wizard in the ring with this chaotic figure outside of it.
But in the midst of this personal chaos, he starts a new chapter in his career, the teacher.
Late 1988, he opens a wrestling school at the Dallas Sportatorium. And this is where his legacy gets a massive boost because one of his students ends up becoming the biggest star in the history of the industry.
Steve Williams, who we all know as Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Austin joined the school in 1989. And he was a quick study. He went from student to having his debut match in just 5 months.
So Adams trained Stone Cold. That should be a point of pride, right? I built the guy who saved the WWF.
You would think. But looking at the sources, the relationship was complicated.
Austin didn't exactly sing his praises later on.
No. Austin later described Adams as a con man deluxe and a pile of crap.
Wow. Tell us how you really feel, Steve. Why the hostility?
Austin alleged that Adams was known for taking students' money and ill-preparing them, basically taking the cash and doing the bare minimum, stiffing them.
But even Austin admits that he learned the snug style from Adams.
So even if Adams was a bad businessman or a scammer, the technique transferred. Austin stomps his punches. They all have that Chris Adams snap.
Exactly. They did feud in the USWA, the United States Wrestling Association, teacher versus student, and eventually the student surpassed the master. Austin went on to WCW and then WWF, becoming a pop culture icon, and Adams stayed behind.
Let's talk about that decline. The 90s were not kind to Chris Adams.
No, they weren't. He became a journeyman.
Explain that term for people who don't follow the business.
A journeyman is someone who has the skills but no home. They bounce from promotion to promotion, suitcase in hand, paycheck to paycheck. He was in the USWA, the Global Wrestling Federation, the NWA. He was working everywhere, but never quite getting back to that WCCW peak.
He was chasing the dragon of his glory days.
There are some bizarre stories from this period. The source mentions a feud with a guy named Rod Price in 1993.
This is gruesome. Adams ripped a hair weave off Rod Price's head. And it wasn't a work, or maybe it was too much of a work. It caused Price to need over 200 stitches.
200 stitches from ripping off a hair weave. How is that even physically possible?
It sounds like a brutal, messy situation where the line between fake fighting and real assault completely blurred.
And then you have strange promotional efforts, like Adams promoting a tour of Nigeria in 1993.
Co-sponsored by Pepsi.
Allegedly. Just shows how he was scrambling, trying to find the next big thing, trying to keep the money coming in. He was hustling.
He finally gets a shot at the big time again in 1997, World Championship Wrestling, WCW.
This was during the Monday Night Wars. WCW was huge, owned by Ted Turner.
He was brought in, and on paper it made sense. They had a stable called the Blue Bloods, aristocratic British snobs, Lord Stephen Regal, who we know as William Regal, and Squire David Taylor. Adams was supposed to join them.
It seems like a perfect fit. The original gentleman joining the new nobility.
It was, but legitimate personal issues got in the way. The source says the run was short-lived. He didn't fit into the group socially or reliability-wise. He ended up feuding with Glacier.
Glacier, the Mortal Kombat character. I remember the blue lights and the snow.
It was a battle of the Superkicks, but Adams was firmly a mid-carder. He was there to make other people look good. There was one moment, a match against Randy Savage on the first episode of WCW Thunder in 1998.
The Macho Man. One of the biggest stars ever.
Adams actually pinned him. He got the 3 count. But
yeah, there's always a but.
J.J. Dillon, the authority figure, reversed the decision. He claimed Savage won by disqualification because Lex Luger interfered. So Adams had the visual victory over a legend, but it was snatched away.
That feels like a metaphor for his whole career in the 90s. Almost there, but not quite. He was released in late 1999. The source says he was unsatisfied with being a jobber, someone who loses to make others look good.
And that brings us to the final tragic chapter. The new millennium starts and Adams' life completely unravels.
April 2000. This is the beginning of the end.
Adams and his girlfriend Linda Kaphengst were found unconscious in a friend's apartment.
It was an overdose, GHB, and alcohol.
GHB is a serious depressant. Combining it with alcohol is lethal. It shuts down the respiratory system. Adams recovered. Linda Kaphengst did not. She died 10 hours later at the hospital.
And suddenly, Adams isn't just a wrestler with a drug problem. He's facing a manslaughter charge.
He was indicted in June 2001. He was out on bond awaiting trial. He was living in Rowlett, Texas with his new wife, Karen. But the shadow of that death was hanging over him. He was looking at actual prison time.
And then comes October 7th, 2001, the final night.
Adams was in Waxahachie, Texas. He was at the home of a friend, Brent Parnell.
What happened that night?
According to the reports they were drinking, they started roughhousing, wrestling around. But as we know with Adams, when alcohol is involved, roughhousing often turns into violence.
It escalated.
It became a brawl. Parnell claimed self-defense. He said he feared for his life. He retrieved a .38 caliber handgun from a nightstand.
And he shot him.
One shot to the chest. Chris Adams died at the age of 46.
Parnell was acquitted of all charges, right?
He was. The jury accepted the self-defense claim, which tells you that the jury believed Adams, an unarmed man, was a legitimate threat to his life in that moment. That speaks volumes about the reputation Adams had developed.
It is such a grim ending. 46 years old, a career that started with Olympic aspirations and ended in a fatal drunken fight in a friend's house.
It's devastating.
So let's try to synthesize this legacy. When we look back at Gentleman Chris Adams, what are we actually looking at?
It's complex. On one hand, you have the stats, 26 titles, the man who trained Steve Austin, the man who popularized the Superkick, which is a foundational move of modern wrestling.
If you watch wrestling today, you see Chris Adams' influence in every single match. Every time someone does a backflip out of a hold, it's Adams. Every super kick is Adams.
Absolutely. But then you have the Meltzer quote, one of the 20 best performers ruined by addiction. You have the documentaries, The Gentleman's Choice, and the Dark Side of the Ring episode. They paint a picture of a man who could never outrun his demons.
It brings up that uncomfortable question about the line between the performance and the reality. We cheer for the violence in the ring. We cheer for the chair shots like the one he gave Kevin Von Erich. But when that violence bleeds into real life, headbutting a pilot, beating a spouse, a fatal brawl, it stops being entertainment.
That's the crux of it. The gentleman was a mask, a very good one. But underneath, there was a chaos that he couldn't control. And sadly, that chaos is what defined his final years.
It is a story that leaves you wondering, what if? What if he had stayed clean? What if he had stayed with the Von Erichs? But we can only look at the history we have.
And the history tells us he was a brilliant innovator who lost his way.
We want to leave you with a thought today. Next time you are watching wrestling and you see someone tune up the band and deliver a super kick to the chin, whether it's the Usos, the Young Bucks, or whoever's on top, take a second to remember where it came from. Remember the judo champion from Warwickshire who brought that snap to the business. And remember the cost that came with the life he lived.
History is rarely simple, and heroes are rarely perfect. Chris Adams was neither simple nor perfect, but he was definitely unforgettable.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious.